This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome, everyone. Today is Wednesday, May 1st, 2024, and this is the Cluster API Karpenter Feature Group meeting. This is a subgroup of Kubernetes SIGs, and as such, we follow their meeting guidance, which basically means please treat everybody as you'd expect to be treated, and please raise your hand if you'd like to talk, and I'll call on you. Although there's not many of us here today, so it shouldn't be a big deal. So I think, we just had one topic for today. Fabrizio had kind of wanted to talk more about, scalable resources and should we be using them, and maybe like we should kind of talk about, instead of using orphan machines, do we want to use scalable resource types to back the node claims? I guess like Fabrizio, I went back and looked through some of our notes when we were having the discussions around this stuff, just to begin with, I don't necessarily have a strong opinion. Like, I don't think one way is like, I don't necessarily think one way is like the technologically superior way. I think we have choices. But I will explain some of the context around how we got to this decision. So initially, I was thinking the same thing you were. I was like, you know what? We can just take machine deployments. We can put them in here. You just scale them up, scale them down based on what Karpenter is asking for. It could look very similar to the cluster autoscaler. And that was the way I had approached this, like even from the earliest days, like more than a year ago when I started looking at it. And as we started to discuss it more, and as I started to look at how Karpenter works, there's a little bit of like a mismatch in the ideology of how the softwares work, right? Like the cluster autoscaler wants to see node groups, and then it wants to scale them up and scale them down. The Karpenter really wants to deal with machines, right? It just wants to deal with individual instances. It doesn't care about the groups that it's in, because it's not really trying to scale groups. It's just trying to say, like, make me one of these machines, make me one of those machines. And so as we started to work through what this would look like for a user to create, and I started to make some internal kind of experiments about this. We got up to the point where I was making clusters with like 75 machine sets in them so that I could represent like every type of instance that would be available. And it started to get really, really wild. And then there's also another layer, which is that, like, usually when we're looking for information, if our first stop is like the machine deployment, then we have to next get the infrastructure machine template to see if there's capacity information there. And if not, then we have to default back to the annotations on the machine deployment, assuming that they're there as well. So the notion of getting the topology information started to get complicated as well. And so as we talked about the proof of concept, we started to say, well, if we could just make orphan machines, that will allow us to kind of take out this middle part where we're having to first query the scalable resource and then query the infrastructure template, so we could reduce the number of calls that were going on there. And then additionally, we could reduce the process of like trying to find the right machine deployment to like increment or decrement, depending on what was happening. Like, because the node claim would come in and we would just have a bunch of infrastructure machines. We could just say, all right, we need to pick this one because it's what's being requested. So that was kind of how we arrived at the decision that we're at now. But, like I said, it might make more sense to go back and reevaluate this in terms of using the scalable resources. I think the biggest thing is like the heterogeneous nature of Karpenter. In the testing that I've done, the more heterogeneous your cluster becomes, the better Karpenter behaves. And the more homogeneous your cluster is, the more it just looks like you couldn't tell the difference between the cluster autoscaler and Karpenter if you only had one or two machine types. So that's kind of a little bit of the background of how we got here. Yeah, please, Fabrizio.
Sorry, I was having trouble to find the reason, the thing. Okay, so first of all, I like context. Sorry if I did not follow the discussion at the beginning. By the way, no, I really like the presentation last week. So the feedback is really to, let me say, to to help you to get to a result and to avoid, friction down the line. So basically, following discussion last week, Stefan raising some good point about what we do about label propagation, what we do about node drain, what we do about cluster class, what we do about, I don't know, max unavailable, max surge, all the criteria that we have in cluster PI. I was thinking, okay, if we go down this path, it is not really true that we not only need machine infrastructure template, we need something else around. So we are going basically to end up with a new machine group abstraction that will confuse user, etc., etc. And so I was kind of thinking, okay, the architecture that you show last time is kind of is interesting because there is a CRD which basically bridge the gap between cluster API and Karpenter. Okay, this new cluster API class thingy, I don't remember the exact name. And so the idea is, what I was thinking out loud is, what if this CRD, we have two options, or this CRD select a group of machine sets, or sorry, machine deployment, or this CRD is built out from deployments. So I make you an example. You in the slide you represented this machine like a collection of templates, and this collection of templates is now in spec. Okay, what if instead we have a controller behind this CRD, and this controller basically looks at the machine deployment which have to be managed by Karpenter, and it fill in the list on template in status. So you basically are using the deployment as a source from what you need, and you get it filtered in the shape that you need it. Karpenter basically gets a node claim and like you were able to link your node claim back to an infrastructure machine. Now you're able to link it back to a machine deployment or whatever. So I think that given that there is this layer of decoupling, it should not be too hard. But this is really and it brings in a lot of advantage, because the user experience from cluster API on point from using autoscaler and using Karpenter will be almost the same. I have a bunch of machine deployment, and I just say with an annotation or whatever, please Karpenter or please autoscaler manage them from me. And then all the complexity is hidden behind the user. And we can rely on everything is already there in cluster API, label propagation, all node drain, everything is already, let me say, handled for you. And so this was really my idea, or to take looking at the slide and say, that's good. We have this layer of the coupling. We can basically use this layer of the coupling to basically bridge from scalable resources to Karpenter and back to scalable resources, and everything plugged in nicely. So this was my, hot take, but I'm not I'm not working on the topic from weeks, but from what you said, yes, it is. I agree with you. We have to figure it out how to bridge back and forth. But if you are willing to spend some time thinking about it, I'm happy to jump in, because I see a lot of value in not adding too much complexity on copy.
I totally agree. And I just want to say further, I think what you're pointing out and what Stefan pointed out in terms of like machine deployments have a lot of information that users want to express, right? Like the max surge kind of stuff, or defining how a machine deployment grows and shrinks, right? So the user is encoding a lot of information into those objects about how they want to interact with the underlying infrastructure. It would be awesome if we could capture that. So that, yeah, users don't have to do it twice. I think the friction that we keep running into is that there's a dissonance between the way these two things look at the cluster, right? Like cluster autoscaler and Karpenter, right? Like, again, this has to do with the nature of the way Karpenter wants to interact with the cluster. But the way that I'm working on the POC right now, I'm following a lot of the upstream guidance from Azure and AWS on how they've made theirs. So like these cluster API transactions are happening well behind an interface that we control. So we could swap out these notions of like direct machine creation, for machine deployment, replica incrementing and decrementing. I think we could do that. It'll just look a little different. I guess like honestly, like I'm perfectly willing to continue investigating this, and I don't think it jeopardizes where we are with the POC at all, because I could continue to make the POC and we can go back and replace some of these layers, later. I'll have to pull back up my notes and everything, because when I got into writing the code for this stuff to like manage it at the scalable resource level, it was starting to get really complex, and so I need to go pull that complexity back out again and identify it, because we talked about this in the meeting in some of our feature group meetings, and I think we agreed at the time that getting rid of the complexity would make it easier for us to get the POC kind of up and running. And that might have affected part of our decision making too. We might have said, you know what, let's skip some of the complexity for now so we can just demonstrate this and get it working. Because there's going to be a lot of gaps in the cluster API part, to fill in. No, I think you're muted, Fabrizio.
If you want, I'm happy to have some hacking session together. I don't think that it will be. I think that bridge the gap won't be, because what I really would like to avoid is that we come up with a POC that works, and then we took 1 year to get it merged with cluster class, and or even more, and then it does not support label propagation and whatever. So I think that, yeah, this Karpenter is a cool thing. Users are asking for it. If we can fast track it in a way that is not disruptive, all the community has to win. Basically, everyone wins.
Yeah. No, agreed. Yeah. And I think that's one thing we've talked about in the feature group here since the beginning is we want this not to be disrupted or complicated for cluster API users. We want cluster API users, to see this as a feature that enhances what they're doing. So why don't we do this, Fabrizio? Let me spend a week thinking about the scalable resource question again, and I'll do some research to pull up kind of the sticking points where I was at. And then maybe like next week or the week after, you and I could get a session going where we can invite whoever else wants to come, but we could really go through like deep technical questions on a point by point basis.
That will be great for me.
Yeah, I'll schedule it earlier in the day too, so you don't have to stay up so late.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I mean, I think that's that's some good action for next time. Then I'll focus on doing that over the next week. Try to get some of these details together, and then I'll put together a doc, and we'll set up a time when we can get together and just spend like maybe 30 minutes, or probably an hour is better. We could just spend an hour going through it, and we'll invite everyone here and anyone else who wants to come as well. Cool. A really great question, Fabrizio. Thanks for just caring enough to want to make this better. So I appreciate it. Does anybody else have questions or comments that they wanted to add while we're here? Nick, I see you unmuting. Okay, well, if no one else has questions or comments, I think we can probably end this a little early. And I'll get back to studying some code. All right. Thanks everyone for coming out, and probably see you next week, if not sooner.